Tonight, major reform to aged care is held up in Canberra after months of talks. Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez. This is ABC News.
Let's all choose Kamala Harris!
Oprah revs up the crowd at the Democratic National Convention. Another delay for a major transport project. A new development in the court case between Senator Linda Reynolds and Brittany Higgins. And the end of a love story. One half of a famous same-sex penguin couple dies at Sydney Aquarium. The federal government insists it's on the cusp of making major reforms to aged care. But with politicians leaving Canberra for another 2 weeks, the sector is expressing disappointment that new laws haven't yet been revealed. As the government prepares to ask older people to pay more for their care, it's introduced laws to pay a superannuation to mums and dads on paid parental leave.
Hey, show us your T-Rex face. Perfect.
The People's Parliament becomes a playground.
Oh, yeah.
The federal government introducing new laws to add super to government-funded paid parental leave from next July, a move Labor says will substantially help women when they retire.
Women shouldn't pay an additional financial penalty just because they're taking time out to do important work like this.
But much like being left hanging for a high five,
Knuckles, high fives.
the government is still yet to get an official sign-off from the opposition on a deal to reform aged care.
We'll have more to say about that subsequently.
There were areas that needed improvement and our Shadow Minister has done an outstanding job to date to seek some concessions.
The two sides have been in talks for months, striving for agreement behind closed doors to get older Australians to pay more for aged care.
Business as usual won't cut it in aged care in the coming decades.
The ABC understands there'll be no criminal penalties for providers who breach standards, and those who can afford it will pay more for residential and home care. But with the finer details still under wraps, the sector's concerned.
More could be a little bit, or it could be a lot. The uncertainty is going to cause anxiety.
The two major parties see bipartisanship on aged care as crucial to limit voter blowback. But nursing homes and those who represent older Australians are fed up with the delays. They'd been desperate for the new Aged Care Act to be introduced here in Parliament this past fortnight.
We now run the risk of not having enough time for older Australians to have their say in a Senate inquiry, or not getting it passed by the end of the year.
Changes are meant to be in effect mid-next year, and more than 3 years on from the Royal Commission, there's a sense older Australians have waited long enough. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
The Coalition has backed a federal government overhaul of the NDIS, which passed Parliament today without support from the Greens. The changes were intended to slow the ballooning cost of the scheme. The bill is a major win for Labor, which managed to broker a deal with state and territory leaders and the Coalition after months of tension. The former NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds and her Liberal colleague Maria Kovacic both abstained from voting in the Senate. The Greens have accused the government of failing to consult the disability sector and described the projected savings as a betrayal of the community.
This has been a nervous time when you hear elements of your life discussed in Canberra. It can create a lot of anxiety. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't have an NDIS, and I think that, well, for me, we will never go back to that space, ever. The pathway forwards is with disabled people.
Australia will spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a new factory that will manufacture and service long-range strike missiles. The government has announced the Norwegian defence company Kongsberg will soon produce its naval strike and joint strike missiles at a facility in the Newcastle Airport precinct. Last month, the Australian Navy successfully test-fired a naval strike missile for the first time. Oprah Winfrey has made a surprise appearance at the Democratic National Convention in support of Kamala Harris. On a star-studded third day, Ms Harris's running mate Tim Walz also formally accepted the party's vice presidential nomination. North America correspondent Jade McMillan reports from Chicago.
Returning to the city where she made her name.
Let's all choose Kamala Harris!
Oprah Winfrey made a surprise appearance in Chicago to give the vice president a high-profile boost.
We won't be set back, pushed back, bullied back, kicked back. We're not going back.
The celebrity cameos piled up on day 3 of the convention, with performances from John Legend and Stevie Wonder.
Are y'all ready? We must choose courage over complacency.
While a former president with star power sought to contrast his party's candidate with her opponent, Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris for the people. The other guy who's proved, even more than the first go-around, that he's about me, myself, and I.
But the night belonged to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
The former schoolteacher and football coach catapulted onto the national stage as Kamala Harris's running mate.
We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Just a few weeks ago, there wouldn't have been too many Americans outside Minnesota who knew anything about Tim Walz. This was his biggest opportunity yet to introduce himself to the public and try to convince voters to back the Harris-Walz ticket.
Honestly, he reminds us of our dads.
Shows humility, thoughtfulness, and a caring for human beings.
The party faithful has bought the sales pitch, but Tim Walz and Kamala Harris will need broader support if they're going to win. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Chicago.
Israeli communities that were devastated during October 7 are planning to boycott a government memorial event marking the first anniversary of the Hamas attack. Many residents of the small southern border town say they felt abandoned during and following the attack.
On the Gaza border, a respected grandfather and friend is lowered into the ground next to his son. Avraham Munda was captured alive by Hamas militants on October 7, along with his wife, daughter and 9-year-old grandson. Those relatives were released after nearly 50 days in captivity, but Mr. Munda was left behind.
Dear father, you recovered from your injuries from the kidnapping, but were abandoned again and again by the Prime Minister.
Avraham Munda was one of 6 Israeli hostages whose remains were recovered by the military from the Gazan city of Khan Yunis this week. It's likely at least one was killed by Israeli fire. Family and friends of the hostages say their government has failed them.
He would be here alive. Wounded but alive.
I don't believe that they really want to bring them back.
Hamas is still believed to be holding 109 hostages. Israeli authorities estimate at least a third of them are dead.
It was here on the Gaza border that communities bore the brunt of the October the 7th attacks. Now their residents say they're going to boycott a planned government memorial service. They'd prefer the government spent its energy trying to save the hostages who are still inside Gaza rather than memorialising the events of that day.
In Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 50 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes over a 24-hour period. The Israeli military issued new evacuation orders, forcing Palestinians to move yet again. Waiting for a ceasefire, their misery made worse by successive displacements and disappointments. Eric Dworchek, ABC News on the Gaza border.
The bodies of 5 people have been recovered from the wreckage of a billionaire's super yacht which sank during a storm off the coast of Italy. Divers with the Italian Coast Guard retrieved the remains before surrendering them for identification. 1 passenger is still missing. The The luxury vessel was carrying 22 people, including the British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch. Investigators are working on a theory the yacht was struck by a tornado over the water and sank within minutes. The opening of the Parramatta Light Rail has been pushed back for a third time after issues were found during final testing. It was originally scheduled to start running late last year. The opening was then changed to May this year and then delayed again by a few months. Now the date has changed again and is pencilled in for later this year. Local business owners say they feel forgotten.
We are in August and it's all testing without any real starting for the project.
Feels like it's never going to open. They've been testing for quite literally over 3 months now. It's just insane.
We want to make sure that when you've got public transport that you expect tens of thousands of people to take every single day. It has to be perfect. Not kind of good, not close to good, 100% perfect.
The Metro West construction has reached a new milestone, with tunnelling through Sydney Olympic Park breaking new ground. After 10 months of excavation, the tunnel boring machines Betty and Dorothy arrived at what will be Sydney Olympic Park Station. It follows the opening of the new City line on Monday morning. Passenger numbers have been climbing strongly. 215,000 people used the Metro yesterday. The ABC's Managing Director, David Anderson, has announced he's stepping down just 1 year into his second 5-year term. His decision comes 5 months after the appointment of Kim Williams as ABC chairman. Mr Anderson says it's time for renewal as the national broadcaster continues to evolve. Here's National Affairs editor Melissa Clark.
The national broadcaster is a $1 billion a year cultural behemoth in the Australian media. And the man at its helm has announced he'll be resigning once a replacement can be found.
It is the right time for me and it's the right time for the ABC. And it wasn't an easy decision to make.
David Anderson took control of the public broadcaster in 2016, seen as a safe set of hands after a turbulent period of conflict between management, the board and the federal government.
People were quite concerned about political interference into the ABC, and I stepped into the role in what was a chaotic time.
That's been, I think, his biggest contribution over the last 5 years, is that he doesn't get flustered. He has a reasonably clear idea of where he thinks the corporation should go.
He was appointed for a second 5-year term, but he's announced his plan to depart just 12 months in, and 1 year into the organisation's latest 5-year plan. He gave little reason beyond the need for renewal.
I think when you know, you know.
Kim Williams took over as the ABC's chair 5 months ago. He's been vocal about the ABC needing to improve programming and standards. In a letter to staff, he said David Anderson is a special individual and that the ABC has been a better place for his leadership. High-profile ABC journalist Laura Tingle told colleagues in her office that, as a staff member, she was grateful to David Anderson for the stability he had brought to the organisation and noted he'd often had to act as a human shield or punching bag for the national broadcaster.
The pressure's been constant, can I say, for the entire period of time.
The next managing director will face the same pressures: a heated political environment, cantankerous commercial competitors, and an audience rightly expecting innovative programs and impartial journalism. The board's recruitment process is expected to take until early next year. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
Coming up on 7:30, the public housing allegedly left neglected by the state.
I feel that I've been ignored and forgotten. They haven't done anything for my house.
Don't have a roof over your head?
Nothing, yeah.
I'm paying rent for the termites that live here.
Every house that we went into had a significant number of problems.
If I was a tenant in the city, those maintenance requests will be done like that.
The Liberal Senator Linda Reynolds has launched fresh legal action against Brittany Higgins as the defamation trial against her former staffer continues. Senator Reynolds has issued a new writ to break open a trust in which Ms Higgins had deposited $2.4 million from her settlement with the Commonwealth over the handling of her 2019 rape allegation. The former minister has now applied to have the transfer of funds to the trust voided and the money returned to Ms Higgins' regular accounts. If Senator Reynolds is successful, the trust money could be used to pay any damages if she wins the defamation trial. The fertility service Monash IVF will pay more than $50 million in a class action settlement with more than 700 patients. It was accused of using inaccurate genetic testing and destroying potentially viable embryos.
5 years ago, Danielle Bopping wanted to grow her own family. She turned to IVF, but says her dreams for a child were dashed.
We don't choose to do IVF unless we have to, and we have no choice but to trust the medical professionals.
Miss Bopping gave her last remaining embryo to Monash IVF for testing, but the results showed the embryo wasn't viable. It later emerged the company's new non-invasive testing method was inaccurate, and a decision to discard the embryo may have been a tragic mistake.
I was angry, I was hurt, I was confused. I just kept questioning, like, how could this happen?
Miss Bopping wasn't the only one, and more than 700 women from around the country took the company to court. Today, it agreed to a $56 million settlement.
This has had real, lasting, devastating impacts on people's mental health.
The women also alleged Monash IVF destroyed embryos without consent, that signatures had been forged, and that one scientist burned documents.
It is not okay in the name of scientific innovation to use clients, paying clients and patients as guinea pigs.
As part of its settlement, Monash IVF has made no admissions of liability. In a statement it said, "We acknowledge this case has been challenging for many people and we regret any distress or hurt that may have been experienced." The company has stopped using the embryo testing method at the centre of the case. The next step is for the Supreme Court to approve the settlement, and that could be a complicated process given the amount of money and people involved, and deductions will also need to be made for legal fees.
There is a sense of closure, although it can never take away the pain and the trauma that so many of us have felt, but that hopefully it allows us to move forward.
Christian Silva, ABC News.
A Central Coast man has been awarded more than $9 million by the Supreme Court after his property was damaged by a neighbouring petrol station. The 2.5 hectare site in Canwell has been leaching petroleum for 8 years. The EPA ruled the service station next door was to blame, paving the way for the court to award damages and costs. But the station's owner, Zoya Investments, went into liquidation earlier this year, and the landowner is now worried he won't see any of the money he's owed. There are calls for the service station to be closed until the cause of the pollution is addressed. The former Waverley councillor Sam Einfield has told a court he was abusing prescription medication when he violently assaulted an elderly widow at her home in inner Sydney. Einfield has pleaded guilty to assaulting 82-year-old Margot Priday after ramming his car through her garage door in Surrey Hills in 2022. The 45-year-old former lawyer repeatedly kicked Ms Priday as she lay cowering on the floor, leaving her with cuts, bruising and a fractured finger. Ms Priday today implored the judge to send Einfield to jail, telling the court she'll continue to live in fear if he's allowed to remain free. Einfield apologised to his victim, telling the court he's received treatment in a rehab centre for his addiction. He'll be sentenced next month. A man has been arrested after he forced open an emergency exit door of a Jetstar plane moments after it landed at Melbourne Airport this morning. Jetstar says the plane had landed from Sydney and was at the gate when the man opened the door, automatically deploying the emergency slide. He then walked onto the wing of the plane and slid down the engine. The man was detained on the tarmac by staff before he was arrested. He'll be charged at a later date. A passenger says the man was behaving erratically before the incident. In Sydney's west, a light plane crashed into a park this afternoon not far from a primary school. The trainee pilot and his passenger only suffered minor injuries. Australia relies on flowers grown on the other side of the world to fill our supermarket bouquets. Many are imported from East Africa. But the pressure to provide the cheapest price at the checkout is costing those who can least afford it.
This is Lake Naivasha, known for its spectacular wildlife and wildly successful flower industry. Many of the world's supermarket blooms come from this region in Kenya.
You effectively get European summer 10 months of the year, so we've got a continuous vegetation period.
Australia imports around half of all sold flowers, especially popular varieties like roses. Kenya is one of our biggest suppliers. Here, the growing conditions are perfect and the stems are cheap.
For a 40 centimetre, we will get something in the region of 8 euro cents per stem.
Peter Zipari is trying to create a carbon-neutral rose, but his attempts to make a more environmentally friendly flower is not helping him to get a better price at auction.
It hasn't changed much over the last 20 years.
Peter's farm is fair trade certified and supports local schools and services, but some other growers across the country have been investigated by the Kenyan Human Rights Commission for poor conditions and pay.
The minimum wage in the sector is about 15,000 Kenya shillings, which should be about 113 US dollars. And we have many farms that are paying way below the minimum wage. We have farms that are paying as low as $63.
Esther is a single mother who struggles to live on her flower farm wage.
We are not okay on the ground. We are very poor. We are very bad.
Buyers have an obligation. They have a responsibility to ensure that they source ethically produced flowers.
These flowers will be flown to shops near us, but at the till, it'll be hard to tell who picked them. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Lake Naivasha.
A humpback whale has been caught in marine lines off Manly in Sydney Harbour. Rescue crews attached large buoys to it to try to slow it down, but they couldn't get close enough to cut the lines before sunset. The whale is being tracked and the rescue operation will resume tomorrow. Let's take a look at finance now. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, the winning streak is now 10 days old. Now, I don't know how many times that has happened in history, but it's not many. There was a 12-dayer in February 2016, so it's the first since then. But as this 30-day graph of the All Ordinaries Index shows, despite rising for 10 days in a row, it hasn't yet regained the record high reached at 1:30 p.m. on August the 1st. Today's rise was driven by some of the banks, tech stocks including WiseTech Global continuing its huge run, and mining stocks, because the iron ore prices stopped falling. In fact, it stopped falling the day after the government put out a statement saying it was falling, which was clearly a buy signal. Copper also rose while oil and gold fell. The US dollar went up a bit last night ahead of the speech by Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell at the Jackson Hole Symposium of Central Bankers that starts tonight, and the Aussie held firm at 67.4 US cents. The market is now expecting 4 US rate cuts by Christmas, with the Fed funds rate expected to come down by 1%. Any hint from the Fed chairman that that's not going to happen will be 6.5 on the Richter scale. If it does happen and the Reserve Bank of Australia keeps talking and acting tough, then the Aussie dollar is heading higher. And finally, the American share market fell yesterday, so its streak was a measly 9, but it did go back up last night, taking Tokyo and Hong Kong with it. And that's finance.
The NRL has named its 14th Immortal of the game. The 6-time premiership winner Ron Coote will go down as one of rugby league's greatest players of all time.
Coote was a pioneering back row forward in the 1960s and 70s who knew how to win.
Back inside to Coote, and Coote will score. A try for Australia by lock forward Coote.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 14th Immortal is Ron Coote.
In a 14-year career, Coote won 6 premierships from 9 grand finals, including 4 with the Rabbitohs during their golden era, before his sensational defection to their arch-rivals Easts, where he won 2 more. His elevation to immortal status ends a 43-year wait.
I never thought I'd be crying when I was 80, but I am.
Rugby League Grand Finals used to be held here at the SCG, so it was only fitting that Ron Coote was immortalised at the place where he won 6 premierships. He joins greats like Clive Churchill, Herbert Daly Messenger and Mal Meninga. Modern icons were among the 11 male players who joined the Hall of Fame. And for the first time, 6 women were inducted. Trailblazers such as Katrina Fanning were recognised for breaking down barriers.
We all know how tough we did it then, what else it took for us to be able to play. So to be amongst this group is incredibly special.
Wayne Bennett also became a Hall of Famer, but the 7-time premiership winning master coach wasn't there, so a protege collected the award for him.
Yeah, he's a great man and just really pleased for him.
A special night celebrating the Giants who've shaped the game. Bindi Bryce, ABC News, Sydney.
It was a love story for the ages. Sven and Magic, the gentle Gentoos, won hearts around the world when their same-sex penguin pairing made global headlines. But Magic is now in mourning after the passing of his long-time partner.
They were a face of equality in the wake of Australia's bitter same-sex marriage debate. Sven and Magic's unlikely love story shot them to international stardom in 2018.
Their names were all over the world. They inspired a Mardi Gras float. They became part of the New South Wales education syllabus. They were even in a Netflix series.
When a negligent heterosexual penguin pair left their egg exposed to the elements, the aquarium staff gave it to Sven and Magic. They have a baby now. Its name is Svenjic.
Svenjic is otherwise known as Lara, and she's now fully grown, mourning the loss of her dad Sven alongside her brother and her other dad, Magic. Keepers took Magic to see Sven's body to help him to try to understand that the love of his life wasn't coming home. Immediately, Magic started singing. Then the whole colony joined in.
It was very touching. I don't think there was a dry eye in the penguin exhibit in that moment.
Gentoos tend to mate for life, so what's next for Magic is unclear, but keepers say he's doing okay. Tragedy for a pair of penguins who proved love isn't black and white. Melissa McKay, ABC News, Sydney.
Let's take a look at the weather now, and Tom, the winter warm spell continues.
Jeremy, temperatures across the state today were as much as 9 degrees above the average, and the peak of this unseasonable heat is still ahead. Now, Sydney worked to a balmy minimum of 15. That was 6 above average, and the 14th consecutive night above 10. That's now the longest streak of double-digit winter minimums in 57 years. And after good winter rains and a mild August, crops are looking healthy across the state ahead of the spring harvest, including the canola around Tamworth, where highs have reached up to 24 this week. Now, across Sydney, a low of 13 in Richmond was 8 degrees above the average, followed by another unseasonably warm day, thanks to sunshine and westerly winds. Gosford and Terry Hills reached 22, Parramatta and Bellambi 23, while the city reached 24, and that was 6 above the average. And with the prolonged spell of warmth forecast to continue for at least another week, Sydney could potentially record 9 consecutive days at least 22 degrees. Now, that would break the previous winter record of 8 days from August 1995. Statewide minimums were again very mild for winter. No frost on the ranges, while Coffs Harbour 17 recorded their warmest August night in 21 years. Maximums today were above average in all regions apart from the Alps. The high was 30 at Evans Head, and that was 8 above average. On the satellite, well, jet stream cloud over the north is not causing rain. Low cloud over the south brought some showers to the inland. Cape Coburn has picked up the most rain with 20 millimetres since last night. On the chart tomorrow, well, this high will keep the state mostly dry, just the odd late shower across the south ahead of that trough. Around the country then, tomorrow a possible storm in Adelaide and Perth, late rain in Melbourne, mostly sunny and warm in Brisbane. For the northeast, slight chance of showers on the north coast, but otherwise dry with a mix of sun and cloud. Heading for 23 degrees across the Hunter and also for Tamworth. For the southeast, colder tonight with some frost patches on the ranges, then partly cloudy and dry before isolated showers develop at night around the snowy mountains. To the west, cooler tonight, then a warm day and fresh and gusty northerly winds. Dry until showers and the odd storm develop over the south during the late afternoon and evening. On the waters, winds from 15 to 20 knots and the seas will average mostly around 1 metre. Now for Sydney, a little cooler tonight under clear skies, down to 11 in the city and 6 in the outer west. Mostly sunny tomorrow with light winds. They'll turn northeasterly in the afternoon. Expect a high of 22 in the city, 21 in Gosford and Wollongong, and up to 23 in the west. The sun will rise at 6:24 and set at 5:33 p.m. And ahead, a warm weekend for Sydney. Shower or two Saturday, more likely in the morning, highs of 25 to 26. A shower or two again on Sunday, but 26 degrees, 8 above average. Then back to sunny skies next week with highs remaining in the mid-20s. Jeremy?
Tom, thank you. Here's Sarah Ferguson for you now with 7:30.